Welcome to the Aaron Michaels Show. Aaron Michaels Show at gmail.com. If you want to get a hold of the program, you can also follow along on Twitter at Wisconsin Aaron. And today is a question and answer program. You can ask me any questions that you may have. They could be about the Packers. They could be about sports just in general. Anything about sports. They could be personal questions if that's what you choose. Whatever you may be curious about or interested in, you can ask questions through Twitter, via email, on YouTube. However it is you want to ask, you ask it, and I will answer it. So let's get into it right now. First question. Do you notice if or when you get radioed on a take? I assume that means, do I notice if I ever get mentioned on the radio for something that I say? The answer to that is no. I listen to some local shows, but not a ton. I listen to some to get the, kind of the vibe of what people are thinking. But overall, I form my own opinions, and I don't really get outside influence on that. I watch, I observe, and I come up with opinions. But I do enjoy flipping on the radio and hearing what fans and media are saying. If for no other reason than to give me talking points for my own show. But I don't pay close attention enough to care or notice if anyone notices me. Doesn't matter to me. It's similar to Twitter. I don't really check my notifications. And I know there are some people out there who absolutely hate me. I know there are some people who love me. I know there are people who completely disagree or do agree with me, and that's fine. I know that happens, but I don't pay any attention one way or the other. I check my Twitter notifications about once every 3 or 4 weeks, if that. And I don't pay much closer attention to what happens on local radio either. I just basically say what I think and I go about my business. The only time I do notice anything is if somebody sees or hears something and fills me in, but I don't watch or pay attention to what's going on. And I definitely don't go out looking for it. Next question. Who is your favorite athlete of all time? Favorite athlete of all time would be Brett Favre. He was the guy that I grew up watching. I was lucky enough to meet him when I was young in Arizona. He was somebody who my dad always pointed me to model myself after in terms of my attitude towards sports and competitiveness. And there are not many people like Favre. And in that way, I don't think we really have anyone like him in sports right now who I would take my kids and say, hey, watch this guy and model yourself after him. They're hard to find. Favre was one of them, and he was a joy to watch most of the time. Sometimes he made you want to shoot yourself in the head too. But when it comes to Favre, I really held it against him when he went to the Vikings. It was the way that he retired from the Jets and then unretired to go to Minnesota. I thought he really weaseled his way to the Vikings. I eventually got over it, and I do love Brett Favre. When it comes to him going to the Vikings, I'm never going to like that. The fact that he went there. But when it comes to him going to Minnesota, the same competitiveness that I loved about Favre in his playing days was the same competitiveness that drove him to go to the Vikings too, in part to stick it to the Packers. And I get it. I always got it. I never disagreed with his decision to do that. As a Packer fan, it upset me that he went there. But like I said, eventually I got over it. And Brett Favre is easily my favorite athlete of all time. Next question. What is your favorite sport to watch or to play? And there's a couple of different levels to this answer. Baseball is my favorite sport overall. I played baseball. I was the head varsity baseball coach in high school for 8 years. I love the game of baseball. My favorite sports team to watch is the Packers. Really, during Packers season, my entire week revolves around the Packer game. My favorite sport to watch, though, overall for a sport, just the pure sport, is hockey. I wish Wisconsin had a pro team. What do the Packers do with their first round pick? And do they sign a big name free agent? And if they do, who? First round pick, I'm going defense all the way. I haven't looked closely enough into who is going to be available, but given the two Gutekunst off seasons, I would say that he's not going to shy away from free agency. He goes all in. You finish one game away from the Super Bowl this past season. This is not going to be a time where Goody takes his foot off the gas pedal. I think he's going to sign free agents, especially on defense. So while I don't have any specific names for you, he will sign free agents, and they will be on defense. You know, his first offseason, he goes out and he signs Jimmy Graham. Now, that hasn't worked out exactly how we wanted, but he signed a big name. And then next offseason, he signs Adrian Amos and then the Smiths. He's going to sign free agents. You know, and it is kind of hard to get out of the mindset of Ted Thompson after like 12 or 13 years of it being a dry desert for free agents. But Goody isn't Ted. Important to keep that in mind and to separate those two guys. He signs free agents. And so far, outside of Graham, he signs them with great success. But, you know, after that defensive performance in the NFC Championship game, how do you not say defense? And front seven specifically. A defensive lineman to put with Kenny Clark, a middle linebacker possibly to replace Blake Martinez, or if you keep him, to put next to him. You know, anyone on this planet that can stop the run. I think the Packers secondary is pretty well set against the 49ers, and all season long, it was the front seven, particularly against the run, that just got lambasted. That's where you need to put the attention. Favorite music artist. Who are my favorite music artists? The Beatles are far and away my favorite. You know, and their music kind of changed over the years. And whether it was in their early days or the later days, they were equally as good. Not many people could pull that off. You know, to kind of change their style completely and still be just as good, just as entertaining, but in different ways. To me, they are the best. They are my favorite. Next question. Do you see any quarterbacks in the 2020 draft that would be a good fit for the Pack? And another question that I got, similar on the quarterback category, says Packers pick up a quarterback second day of the draft. What do you think? My answer to that is I don't think it's a bad idea for Green Bay to draft a quarterback. You can have whatever opinion you want on Aaron Rodgers. I don't think he's been the same for a handful of years. He's not in his prime. So if you want to start looking for a replacement eventually, I think it's about time to do that. That's not to say that I'm not saying a replacement who will replace him next season. And I know there have been some examples of success of young quarterbacks coming in, starting right away, having success. But I think the way to go for Green Bay would be to draft a quarterback, let him sit a few years behind Rodgers, just like Rodgers did with Favre, or behind Favre. You know, grab someone who you can start grooming for when Rodgers is done. Now, even if you're someone who doesn't think that we're anywhere near that point, because I know there's some of you out there, I still think that you can look at quarterbacks and draft them. I mean, teams like the Patriots do it. They've drafted a handful of quarterbacks behind Brady throughout his career. And just because you draft a quarterback doesn't mean it's the guy who's going to replace Rodgers. It's about a guy being there in case of emergencies. That's obviously an important thing too. Or in the case of the Patriots over the years, you get a guy, you groom a guy, and you trade him for something of value back. At this point in Rodgers' career, you probably aren't going to get a guy and then groom him and trade him, but it doesn't hurt to have someone. You know, we've seen in Green Bay how hard it can be to find a backup quarterback. I have no issue with Boyle, but is he the future? Is he your first choice to step in when there may be better options in the draft, I'd have no issue with drafting a quarterback for Green Bay. Next question comes from Twitter. Is Eli Manning a Hall of Fame quarterback? No, he is not. It's a very special, over-the-top group that makes it into the Hall of Fame. And to me, he doesn't fit in that category. I don't think Super Bowls are the only criteria of making it into the Hall of Fame, obviously. And that's the biggest thing you can point to with Eli Manning is his Super Bowl wins. Now, saying that he's not a Hall of Fame quarterback is not to say that he was not worth it for the Giants to have him. He won multiple Super Bowls. It was worth it to have Manning. You can be a big-time difference maker at that most important position without being a Hall of Famer. But even in his prime, he was never his brother. He was never Aaron Rodgers in his prime. He was never Brett Favre. He was never Elway or Brady or Joe Montana. But you can't argue with the results. But Hall of Famer, no. Next question is, do you think a coach's personality affects the personality of his team? I 100% believe that a team takes on the personality of its coach. It probably doesn't happen in year one, but given a few years, teams will take on the personality of their coach. I think when hiring a coach, it's not only important to look at their X's and O's to see how they stack up to what you want, but the personality of the guy is just as important. Because however that coach is, whatever kind of personality he has, that's how your team is going to end up being. You have coaches who are more loose and carefree, and their teams play that way. You see it in the NFL. You have strict disciplinarians, and they're few and far between these days, but those guys are going to have teams that probably don't have many penalties. You probably don't have a lot of over-the-top celebrations either. Teams with coaches who are more loose, you're going to see a team that is more loose, more all-or-nothing type teams. It's either going to go really great or really poorly, but ultimately a team is going to take on their coach's personality. Next question, if you were the Packers GM, what positions would be top priority in free agency and the draft, and why? Free agency, I think I addressed earlier, but I will kind of expand on that. Getting blown out by the 49ers a couple of times really shows how far away the Packers are from a Super Bowl. You got your clock cleaned twice by a far superior team, and the glaring issue in both was the defense, especially the run defense the second time around. If they're keeping Pettin, which they are, they obviously think that it's on Goody for not getting the talent needed to have success. If they really thought that they had the talent, I assume that they would have fired Pettin for not doing enough with that talent. So if I'm the Packers, I would continue to put resources into the defense. At least your top draft picks and most expensive free agents. A lot of people would say, well, what about the offense? Clearly, the Packers need receivers and tight ends as well. And the Packers, they definitely lack talent at receiver. But I would err on the side of signing free agents on offense at receiver rather than draft picks. The reason being, if you're trying to help Aaron Rodgers out, you don't have time to develop rookie receivers, particularly with how picky and strict Rodgers is with his receivers. You can't go grab a few rookie receivers and expect Rodgers to be okay with throwing them into the lineup. Next question, a political question, my favorite. Bigger hoax, Trump colluding with Russia or climate change? Excuse me. I'll leave it at this. The climate does change. It is warmer in the summer and colder in the winter. What is your favorite holiday? Answer to that, St. Patrick's Day. I'm Irish. I also do like beer. What is your favorite Wisconsin sports venue? That is a good question. Favorite Wisconsin sports venue? First and easiest answer is Lambeau Field and a Packer game. You can't beat that. I go to more Brewer games than anything else, but I think if you're talking about the pro sports events in Wisconsin, they all kind of have their own personality and unique culture. Brewer games have a few things. First of all, tailgating is great. Being outside in the summer or sometimes in the freezing cold doesn't matter. The parking lot starts out, as kind of one big party. And then you go in and it's baseball. It's relaxed, it's laid back. Going to Bucks games is unique. It's downtown. There's other things to do before and after the game, spending time downtown. Go to a great restaurant, go to a classic bar. Bucks games, they're energetic, they're intense. Opposite of Brewer games inside the stadium, unless they are playing, unless the Brewers are playing the Cubs or a playoff game. But if you're looking for a rush and a head buzz, you're going to go to a Bucks game. And, the Packers, there's really nothing like that. It's the most unique and surreal event that you can go to in Wisconsin. It's Lambeau Field and it's the Packers. You can't beat that. I was in Montana a few years back, and I stopped into a Walmart to get a temporary fishing license. And the guy behind the counter, looking at my ID, saw that I was from Wisconsin, and he was an older fella. He said that he's been a Packer fan and lived in Montana his whole life. And he told me that he used to watch Vince Lombardi and Bart Starr, and he told me how much he wanted to go to Lambeau Field and how great that would be someday if he were able to do that. And that just kind of made me step back and appreciate having Lambeau in our own backyard. And at that time, which I guess is still true even though I live in a different place, at that time I lived about an hour away from Green Bay, still do, just in a different location. But this historic stadium with an iconic team is really the envy of a lot of people. And many wish that they could someday just go and experience a game at Lambeau. Not just for the Packers, but also being at Lambeau Field. And with that guy in Montana, it really made me appreciate being in Wisconsin and being really just right down the road from Lambeau Field. Next question. What is the most memorable sporting event you've ever been to? That one is easy to answer. The answer to that pops into my mind right away. Packers Seahawks wild card game in 2003. Al Harris interception for a touchdown to win that game. That was the first game that my dad and I had ever attended together, and one hell of a finish, picking off Matt Hasselbeck for the pick six. Of course, the week after that was 4th and 26 against the Eagles. But that entire season, 2003, was one heck of a ride. Started out with the passing away of Brett Favre's dad before the Monday night game of the Packers going and playing the Raiders, and Favre has the game of his life. A few weeks later, the Packers get in after beating the Broncos, but the memorable part of that was the Vikings being knocked out of the playoffs by the Cardinals. And then you have the Al Harris interception for a touchdown in week 1 of the playoffs, and then the 4th and 26 where it all came crashing down. But that was one of the just more crazy stretches of sports that you're ever going to find. Next question, similar to that, what was the first Packer game you ever attended? And my first Packer game was, and I don't remember the year, but it was a Monday Night Football game at Lambeau Field against the Miami Dolphins, and it would be easy enough to find out the year. It was the game where Chris Carter returned from retirement and played for Miami. It was his first game back. Next question is, why does Milwaukee sports media fail to show love to the first place Milwaukee Admirals? I think the answer to that is it's like anything else. Any business that you have, you're going to talk about the most popular topics because the people who are listening to you drive your ratings. They're the ones who've put food on your table. And Wisconsin is always going to be a Packer first state, followed by the Brewers, followed by the Bucks, and then everything else after that. And there's nothing wrong with being into the Admirals or the Milwaukee Wave, but if you took a poll of people that live around Milwaukee even, nobody would be able to tell you what the name of the Admirals goalie is. I mean, some would, but not enough to make a difference. And again, I'm not putting down if you follow or love the Admirals. Nothing wrong with that at all. But when it comes to the media, they're going to talk about what the majority of fans want to talk about and what they want to hear. It's just the way that it goes. It's just part of business. That's going to do it here for today's show. Thank you for sending in your questions via Twitter or the email or YouTube, whatever the case may be. If you want to send fan mail, you can definitely do that. Aaron Michael Show at gmail.com. You can also follow along on Twitter at Wisconsin Aaron. Thank you for listening tonight. Have a great day.